Hi, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Stake and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also to the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join us for Series 1 as we sit down with business leaders and CEOs who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership. Karen is a leading voice in the modern employee ownership movement, bringing practical perspective from the heart of the manufacturing sector. She is the founder of Relinea, a Northern Ireland business specializing in advanced glass reinforced plastic solutions. After building and leading the company for over 15 years, she transitioned Relinea to an employee ownership trust, making it one of the first manufacturing companies in Northern Ireland to adopt this alternative succession model. The transition ensured that Relinea's legacy of engineering excellence and innovation remains in the hands of the people who built it. Karen now serves as the chair of Employee Ownership Ireland, where she supports business owners considering employee ownership as a succession option and contributes to policy development and awareness of the model. Her work continues to shape the conversations around inclusive and sustainable business ownership across Northern Ireland. Alongside this, she mentors founders and business leaders with a particular focus on supporting women to start, grow, and lead value-driven businesses.
Good morning, Karen. Welcome to a Stake and Soul podcast.
Morning, Barry. Thank you very much for the invite.
No, great to see you. We've done a couple of sessions in the past together. Love to hear your story. I guess I should open in terms of just having read your bio and introduction. Glass reinforced plastic solutions. That's an interesting mouthful. What does a business like that do, and how did you get into it in the first place?
Okay. We supplied a fiberglass or glass reinforced plastic GRP alternative to the construction sector, and what we were essentially doing was supplying an alternative steel like platforms and access ways, ladders, handrail, and that would all be done in a GRP material. So you've got a lot of benefits there of non-corrosion and lightweight and easier fabrication. So like significant benefits, but in terms of where this came from, I had actually been working for a company that had been supplying this into the construction sector as a salesperson. So that's essentially where it all started. I came across this product quite a few years ago now, but at the time it was new and it was quite novel. So it was about educating the market in terms of this alternative.
It sounds like there was then quite a significant jump from you working for another company to setting up your own company.
Yeah, so the scenario was that as a salesperson, and that's what I was doing. I was going in and selling, and telling people that we could supply X, Y, and Z and making promises that we would deliver on that. And in the construction sector, you need to deliver, okay? And it's very unforgiving if you don't. And I was finding this particular company was consistently failing my customers, poor delivery schedules and everything else. And essentially, I got to the point where I just thought, something one day that I could do this better myself. That's literally where I got to. It was like, I can't keep taking these phone calls anymore. It was damaging my reputation. I just felt I was constantly letting people down. So yeah, I reached that point where I said, look, this needs to change. And we did the usual wrangling over the kitchen table. Okay, will I, won't I? And it really got to the point where there was two questions in my head. First one was, what is the worst that can happen? And can I live with the worst that can happen if I go ahead with this? And I decided yes. And the other question was, would I live to regret it if I didn't do it? And I think ultimately that answer was yes. And I think that's proved to be right. It's been an amazing journey, setting up the company. But yeah, it was like literally, I think most companies start off in that way. It's the whole the whole question of are you doing the right thing? But I just felt it was right. And so I made the call and ordered a container of grating from China and kept my fingers crossed that it would arrive with what I ordered. and resigned and set up what was then at the time GRP Systems and is now known as Relinea. So that is how it all came about.
Wow, what an amazing story. So literally, was it just you on day one, or did you have others working with you?
It was me, but my dad was my support network. You know, he was, he called him my wingman, but also my punch bag as well. So he was there. Like I set up out of the, you know, we had a yard and things, you know, near my family home. So that's where I set up. But literally it was working out of a porta cabin and an old farm shed with no windows. I had an angle grinder and what was the other thing? Oh yes, and a really dodgy forklift, and that was where it began. So, and we built up from there. Like, you know, my focus, like I mentioned, was very much about customer service and keeping those promises that we were making. And I very quickly realised that a lot of companies were doing what my old company were doing. They were not delivering on those promises, and I was surprised how many were not, to be quite honest with you. And so my motto for me, for the business was, you know, to be our customers' easiest supplier to work with. And we consistently delivered. We're only set up really a few years, and then the financial crisis hit in
Right.
you know, 2010. And that was really difficult for us. And I was in the process of building a new manufacturing unit, and the shutters came down everywhere, not only on funding, but also on my customers. Most of my customer base was in Ireland, and I had to look elsewhere. So I went across to your neck of the woods, to England, with my wee bag of samples going, thinking, is anybody actually going to buy this stuff from a wee girl from Northern Ireland? But they did. They trusted me. They gave me, you know, one of the first visits I made, they gave us a small order, and that customer still is in play today. They still work with us today. So, and I think it's that consistency, it's that customer service and delivering on the promises is being really key to our growth and sustainability.
Wonderful. What a wonderful story. And so, I mean, it's interesting, the timing of our podcast, because it's not quite to the day, but it's 4 years since you became employee owned. What led up to that decision? Sort of talk us through from the days when you were essentially just on your own, building a team. My understanding is that you were about 50 or so partners.
30, 35. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So, you know, the business has grown nicely. You've weathered some of the challenges of the global financial crisis and what have you. What was then the sort of catalyst for you thinking, actually, things need to change? Was it, you know, around succession, and what led to the journey to ultimately become employee owned?
Yeah, look, well, I have no kids, I have no children. Okay, so I suppose succession and what was going to happen to the business in the long term was in the back of my head. It was there, but it was not something I was very, very conscious of considering, because, you know, I was happy, things were going well. You know, I'm not, well, I didn't consider it myself to be at that point. You know, it was really a priority at that stage. But then there was an event, and somebody said this to me. There's a day in your life when you're different the day after, and that day was the day my father passed away. So it's still quite tough.
Sure.
And so that was in 2018. And so I think what happened, Barry, then was the passion went. Okay, to run a business, you need to be so passionate about it, and without that, what used to be easy becomes a dream. Okay, and it was, you know, it was a difficult time and a difficult process for me, but also I had a business to run, and you know, things were going exceptionally well. We were going from, you know, 10,000 to 100,000 to £1 million orders. You know, that you know, we were on that trajectory, and things were going exceptionally well. We were building a really good reputation. We had been through the pain, you know, of a startup business, and that, you know, that initial growth, and we were in that scale up mode. But I felt at that stage I wasn't the best person to take the business on to the next level. But I also recognised that we had a really good team, and you know, they helped me to get through that time. But also, I recognised that they had the potential for taking the business onto the next stage. So I started exploring selling, first of all, to be honest. I went down the usual route of the third-party sale and started speaking to some M&A companies. But, very quickly, the best way I can describe it, I came out of those meetings feeling a wee bit dirty. It's the best way I can describe it. There was no talk about, it was just talk about money and what money I could get for the business, but there's no talk about the employees or basically the communities that those employees were, the business was in. And for me, it just felt like it was just a business, thing. And this is something I had built and grown. It was the baby, essentially. And I just felt that it wasn't that process just didn't fit right for me. So I came away and I thought, look, there has to be something else. So I explored the management buyout option and spoke to the senior team about that, but they really weren't in a position to go down, to go down that route. So it was really kind of, what am I doing here? And fortunately, during one of the conversations I had with an M&A company, believe it or not, they mentioned about EOTs, and I had never heard of it. I'd never come on the radar. And then I started doing my own research. And the more I looked into it, the more I just thought, something, this ticks all the boxes for me. It rewards the employees, who have helped build the company. It keeps the company local. And it's like about sustainability. And I'm a real big advocate for businesses in Northern Ireland. We are a small country. We're built on small businesses, and we are the lifeblood of this country. And you not see all the time, but you see on occasions companies being bought, and really successful companies being bought. And a really good example of that was, there was a company called Chain Reaction that was based in very local to us, that had been sold to an outside investor about 3-4 years previously. And then there was one day they announced 300, that they were closing the site. They were closing down the site completely, and that was going to involve the loss of 300 jobs, never mind the wider supply chain. Out of interest, that company no longer exists at all anymore. And I just didn't want that happening to Relinea. And I just felt like, when I came across the EOT model, I think I was on the train tracks, and that was me. I was there, and I was signed up for the EOT club, and
amazing.
That's where we got to.
Yeah, and what was the? That very much mirrors up some of our journey. It was an M&A broker, in fact, who signposted EOT for us, and exactly the same. We'd never come across it, didn't really know what was involved. So you'd made this decision, you've done some reading. What about in terms of the team? I guess you're a manufacturing business. You talked about the importance of sort of legacy, and I guess describing the culture of the business. How would you sort of articulate what it felt like to be in Relinea at that point culturally? And I guess then leading into that, how did you then start to sort of socialize the whole idea of becoming employee owned with the team? Because I guess it's probably more challenging to communicate something like that in a manufacturing business than it might be in a financial planning business.
I think, that's definitely something I'm noticing, because the spaces I'm now operating in professional businesses, it's people are much more engaged in terms of on that strategy side. They maybe understand better where the business is wanting to go and things. Whereas, we at Relinea, and as in manufacturing, you have the management side and I suppose the office staff to a certain extent, and then you have the work, the shop floor people. And like the different priorities are different for different people, and definitely for me on that, the guys that are coming in and working in that environment every day on the shop floor, their priorities are that they can come in and they basically, that their job is secure and that they're rewarded for what their contribution, and they're treated fairly, and that is that basically comes across in terms of any communication and things that we're doing with them, that it is about fairness, and it's about being well rewarded, and that their jobs are safe. With obviously the senior, with the management team, it's more about where's the company going, where's the potential for growth. It's a different focus, But ultimately, when in succession, you need to consider all parties and what is how does their different needs fit into to how you're progressing to going forward. And I think that's where the EOT model is so good, because there's that flexibility within it. Okay, there's no requirement to put money in. Nobody has to put any financial input into this model. But they all have a voice. Okay, by selling your business in the employee ownership trust, it means that you're selling. The business then operates for the benefit of the employees, and their welfare and their well-being actually is paramount. In terms of, obviously, but the welfare of the business and the success of the business means that their welfare is secure for the long term. So the two work in tangent. Yeah.
Were all parties keen in terms of the leadership of the business, and was there any skepticism, or and I guess in terms of how you then communicated, because it's a difficult concept for people to get their heads around, isn't it? Initially, how was that communicated to the team, and was everybody totally bought in from the outset, or it's just interesting to know the sort of process you went through to take them from this big change coming down the track to actually, well, what does that mean for me, and what's the reality? And Karen, does that mean you might not be in the business? And how did you sort of guide them through that quite challenging communication process?
I think initially for me, the initial process was obviously finding out as much as I could about it. Okay. First of all, that was my first kind of level, was it's like, what does this mean? What is it, what is it going to mean for the business? And I just want to say here from that point of view, Barry, we were one of the first company. We were the first manufacturing company. We were the second company in Northern Ireland to go through this process. Okay. And there wasn't an ecosystem that existed here. I was also trying to do this during COVID, and it was a pretty lonely place. The EOA was a great resource. I was going on to them, but I couldn't get in front of anybody. I couldn't sit and have a face-to-face with somebody and, find out about the nuts and the bolts, the pluses, the minuses. And the EO space is a very positive space for good reason. But actually, there is a process here, and there's a before and after. And I think, it's those conversations, I think, would have given me more insight to actually what I should have, the things I should have been considering. And I was literally flying blind, if I'm honest with you. I made the decision that I felt this was the best thing for the business. I spoke to the senior team and, obviously about the management buyout. And then we floated this idea. We brought in an advisor. I made sure that they were comfortable with the advisor as well. And we started the conversations and just saying actually, where this could go. But I think from my perspective, my heart was set on this. So I don't know if I listened to what was coming the other way, but I suppose, my intention was that I was going to step down as MD. I was going to stay on as a director, but, my belief was that, I'm moving this business on. Okay. And it's the next, leaders that have to take the charge of it. Okay. That's where my mindset was. So that's the structure I wanted to put in place, and then you get then into the process. And to me, I like a process. I like to tick things off a list, and the moving a company to an EOT is relatively straightforward. You go through the process, and so that's what we did in terms of communicating the rest of the staff. So see. The senior team were, we discussed options in terms of, because we looked at EMI schemes and things like that as well. So they were all part of that about, what it would look like directly for them. And then, they agreed to what we were, what was being put forward. We agreed in evaluation, and so that was all settled. And then, it was like, okay, we're going to tell the staff this is moving forward. So we transitioned in March 2022. So we sat the staff down just before Christmas before then, and we got them all in a room. They knew my circumstances. They knew my where I was at from a personal perspective. And I think there was concern. I think they were worried about what was the future of the business was. It's like, is she going to shut the gates, or, is she going to sell? And ultimately, I suppose if we were going to sell, that more than likely we're going to sell to a competitor, and what would that look like for them? So they were a bit uneasy, and then I got up and I talked about what we were going to do. And then our advisor came in and he talked about the actual process, about what that looked like, what it would mean for them. But Barry, to be honest, it was mostly like it was over their head, you know,
Right.
a lot of it.
Right.
They just heard, look, things aren't going to change. I'm going to step down, but the senior team's going to stay the same. You know, we're going to be, you know, the business is still going to exist. You've still got a job. And that's what they heard. That's the top level of what they heard. And that made them feel a lot easier. They knew there was a plan, and that we would progress it in a way that was going to be looking after them.
Sure. Did you always intend to go 100% employee owned at outset? You didn't think of becoming a hybrid, or there was no particular rationale in your circumstances for doing that?
I think, look, you know, I mean, like, for me, it was like, I'm either in or I'm not. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if they're going to be taking the business on to the next level and building it, okay, the reward should be theirs. All right. You know, I'm getting my reward because, you know, my intention was to step away fully from the business whenever, you know, as a director, whenever the consideration was paid. So, you know, I mean, that was where my heart was. And I think it's either you're in or you're not in. And maybe it's because I'm a bit of a control freak. I don't know. But, you know, they were responsible for moving it on. And I just felt that the reward should be theirs.
Sure. So you talked a little bit about the senior team. Is there now essentially a CEO, managing director, who's making the main calls? And if so, how were they an internal promotion, or how did you go about essentially transitioning what you'd historically done? It sounds like you were, you know, the main driver of the business. How did that process happen and take place?
Yeah, look, you know, it's most things. It's like some things just happen by accident or just fate or whatever. But when my father was ill, there was who is now the MD, David, came into the business as a general manager, and I just seen that he was a real support network for me. Our other director, our sales director, had been with me a long time, and look, I suppose you'll know yourself, you just see in individuals, actually, this is a person that can lead the business. And so I was in the process of doing that anyway before we transitioned. All right. So, you know, I was putting him in more of a senior role. We moved it to a director level and things like that. So that was already happening. And I think just like come on after COVID, I think COVID coming along after, you know, basically, you know, it's just different, you know, then, you know, you just kind of go, actually, there's more to life. And I think as well, I was getting to a point where the responsibility of it, especially during COVID, it was really difficult. We were dealing with real problems with supply chains every day. You would come in to solve problems, and the next day you would come in to solve exactly the same problems, because it just was on repeat. And it was exhausting and it was draining. And it was like, I was thinking something has to change here. Okay. And, you know, reflection, you know, there's some other options, you know, maybe if I'd, you know, taken on support mentoring or something like that, or coaching, then some of the options might have been different. You know, I might have considered some other options, but where I was at that time, I was just like, this is where I feel like this is the best option for me and for the business. And I feel that there's the right people in place to move it forward. So that's where I got to.
And then you essentially transitioned the CEO MD role to David, but then you carried on the board. And what was the transition path from not running the business to being on the board to where you are now? And again, for others listening to the podcast, any general guidance and advice about how quickly should a founder exit? I guess it very much depends on the business, but is there any sort of areas of learning there from your perspective as to, I think we got this really right and that really worked, or equally things where you think, actually, I should have stepped back a bit more quickly?
Well, for me, the intention was I stepped down as MD on day one. Okay, and I remained on as a director and as a trustee as well. And I think from a point of view, you've got money in the game, so I think it's important that you especially if you're stepping down from that lead role, that you have some oversight about what the plans are for the business and where that new director wants to take it and things like that, and ensuring that obviously everybody's still, on the page as far as, when you basically moved it towards an EOT, and that your investment, your that financial consideration is still protected. So I think that is really important, okay, because it gives you that confidence that at least there's, you're keeping an eye on things from that perspective. In terms of stepping away, look, there's no denying. I think one of the areas that I think I was pretty unprepared for whenever I moved the company to an EOT was that sense of identity and that loss of identity. I couldn't actually quite believe it, how important to me, and I didn't actually appreciate it, was how important being the MD of Relinea had become. It was me, it was who I was. And that literally disappeared overnight. And I think, and it's grief. There is a grieving process there. And I think I really fully underestimated that. And I'll hold my hands up. It wasn't easy. I did really struggle. From that perspective, but I felt that was more like an internal struggle. I don't believe, or hopefully I didn't bring that out in the business. I wanted to protect the business, and I wanted to secure the business as an EO business, and that's what my priority was and still is. And making sure that it's basically it's a strong and sustainable business, and that is that for me has been the priority. And so moving, like staying within it for that period of time, you do feel a bit like the mother-in-law staying in the house after the kids have got married a wee bit. And, I think it is important if you're not in that lead role as a founder and you're stepping away, I think it is important that you do let them get on with it. And but it's ensuring as well that there's structures in place, and the structures or governance structures are robust enough to give you the confidence that the company is sustainable for the long term, but also is, it's about protecting your legacy as well. There is that element too. I put my heart and soul into Relinea. I gave 20 years of my life. It wouldn't exist without me. So I feel like I have the privilege to be able to make recommendations in terms of how I want the values and the vision of the business. Okay, that's what I obviously believe that I was doing in terms of the EOT deeds and setting up the EOT. It's about that vision that you want for the business. Yes, people can come along and change that, but for me, that's where the basis of the company was. My basis was always, making sure that we do right by our customers and our employees, and that ethos still exists. So and long may it continue.
Yeah. So by the time David essentially took over as MD, did you then was he pretty familiar with all the aspects of the business, or was there a necessity or a frequency of meetings where you two got together just to sort of discuss how things were going, and he would go, you've been here before, how might you counsel me or guide me through this particular thing? Or was there pretty well a clean break when you stepped down from being MD?
I think I wanted to move into a technical role more, because that was my happy place. And again, that worked really well, because we were picking up a few contracts as well that were quite, there was a lot of technical elements to it. There was a lot of design elements, and we were struggling in our design department. It was an area that, getting design engineers is still not easy. Okay. And it was a department that needed support, and it was something that I felt I could make a real good contribution in. So we really stabilized that, and were able to scale up the way we needed to scale up. And that suited really well in terms of that. But yeah, David was pretty much on the, he understood the business. He knew what the needs were of the customers, and he understood the supply chains. He understood, how each department worked. And he'd also helped me to build up that team, that senior team as well. So, you know, he was part and parcel of developing that team as we had grown during those, that period of time when he was there.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. And it's interesting you reflect on how challenging it was for you stepping down when you did 4 years ago, and the fact that perhaps you were more emotionally invested in the business than you'd may thought about. As you've reflected on that over the last couple of years, what would you have done differently around that, if anything, I guess?
Prepared more. I think I thought I was prepared, to be honest. But you know, it's I think talk to more people. Where I feel my biggest error was not talking to enough people, either before, during, or after the process. And a lot of that's come from us not having the ecosystem here. And you know, I know we get into this a bit later on, but this is one of the areas that's really, really important to me, and about the work that we're doing with Employee Ownership Ireland, and creating that network and that community that actually supports people at every stage of the process. And that for me is really, I think, where I feel that if I'd got more support on that side, it would have been definitely easier. Yeah.
Right. So you've now made the decision, 2022, March 2022, the team know. What's different? What's changed now over the last few years since becoming employee in? Because I guess, again, one of the things that often we talk a lot about owner mindset, and sometimes people say it doesn't really feel materially different to how it did before, because the nature, I guess, of a business that goes down the route of becoming employee owned, there's a great culture, and it's why probably people wanted to work for Paradigm Norton and why they want to work for your business. But have there been any significant changes that you think you can put your finger on to say that's as a result of being now an employee owned business?
Yeah. Look, I think it's trying to get that employee buy-in. All right. It's like, you know, you try and bring, you know, I'm sure every company does this. You try and bring incentives to try and get them to be more productive, to notice, like, reduce waste, to notice mistakes earlier, especially in manufacturing. Okay. It's, you know, the classic is something gets to the door and you go, well, it's a mistake. You know, you would have spotted this mistake at 4 stages ago. And, you know, you try and bring incentives, and we did. But it's hard to maintain them, because they you know, there's the financial reward, but actually there's other stuff as well. It's just not always financial. And what we have found since going EO is that the staff are holding each other to account, okay, which is really where the big shift has come from. You know, it'll be like, if, you know, we work with resin, and like, you know, it's really important that you only use the amount of resin that you need for a particular job. So instead of filling a bucket, and they now are like, you know, they'll use what they need, and they'll take out what they need. And they're very conscious of that, because we're constantly saying, look, you know, you are owners of this business now, so you need to think, actually, where's the waste? Can we reduce waste? Because ultimately that's going to help your bonus. It's going to help your business. It's going to, you know, and they've got skin in the game now as well. Okay. So they feel that, you know, we've really endorsed that whole feeling of ownership in them, and they feel that there's skin in the game. So you'll hear them things like, you know, they're turning out the lights, and it's just wee things like that, you know. And we talk now about that 1%, okay, that 1% change, and it doesn't take very much, you know, but those 1% can all build up to something very, very substantial. And I think that's where we have seen the biggest changes in terms of our productivity. You know, the company is doing extremely well, but we have, you know, we've increased turnover, but we have actually maintained, or probably slightly increased, our margin, you know what I mean, our overall margin. And for a company in growth phase, that is very difficult to do. And I believe a lot of that has come from that mindset of, you know, the employees all working together and saying, actually, how can we make this better? Spotting each other's mistakes and holding each other to account, and saying, like, you know, it gets to the next stage of the process and somebody goes, well, there's a mistake here, rather than passing on the mistake to the next person, they're stopping the process and going back, so it doesn't get to the end and cost even more money. So that's where I definitely see the biggest mindset change. But also, you need to create that situation to happen. It just doesn't happen because you tell them they're employee owners. You know what I mean? You can tell them they're employee owners till the cows come in, but if you don't back it up with anything, it's just words at the end of the day. And so one of the big things for me was, as part of the transition, was to ensure that the employees were going to get the full tax-free bonus on each year of the transition, as the consideration was getting paid. If they were eligible for it. So we had, if they were 2 years plus in terms of their time with us, they got the full £3,600. If it was 1 to 2, it was half, and then if it was less than 1,
right.
there was a small token gesture. And that for me was really, really important, because part of the process of the reason why I was doing this was to give, to thank them for creating what we had created. And that for me was a real big factor. And actually, this is something tangible to them. And I would say to any company that's maybe considering going EO, that it is important. Give them something. It's like, if you're waiting for the consideration to be fully paid before and starting to pay these staff bonuses, that could be 5, 6, 7 years away. And in the meantime, you're hoping to grasp onto those benefits of employee ownership, like the benefits of increased productivity, increased engagement, all that type of thing. And you're hoping to access those benefits, but you're not giving them anything to be able to do it. You just keep telling them there's something there from them, but there's nothing. It's 5 or 6 years away. So, and I think companies that I've been speaking to that do put in even it doesn't have to be the full 3,600, or giving them, or giving the employee owners a bonus of some description, really do see that big change, and they see that engagement level really starting to ramp up as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember in the early days when we became employee and someone talked to us about information, influence, and reward. So you're giving your team more information, you're giving influence, you're wanting them to influence the business. But the third leg of the stool, I guess, is reward. And it's very difficult to impart information, encourage people to think like owners, and then not share in the sort of rewards of the business. So yeah, totally supportive. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's got to be, there's a number of different competing elements when you're starting to pay out deferred consideration, the growth of the business. With us, we've got things like capital adequacy. There's lots of challenges for the incoming CEO to grapple with, but I completely agree, to at least start to pay a modest increasing profit share makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think, I structured the deal, and the deal was that it was affordable. Like, we looked and said, okay, this is, before my consideration is paid, this has to be paid. You know what I mean? And that's, you have flexibility as a founder. You have flexibility in the deal that you set up. Okay, and there is possibility to put that flexibility into it. Sure. Of course, considering maybe if some if there's COVID hit, there, obviously bars, things like that. But in the normal running of a business, you're looking and planning, and you're planning how the consideration is going to be paid. So, well, why not plan actually to allow for some sort of bonus to be paid to the staff? Yeah, because we put that through we paid the first half of that bonus for that year in 3 months after transitioning. Okay, so we pay it twice a year. And I also look at another company as well. Like, there's a company in here in Northern Ireland, S&W Wholesale, who are big, they would be one of the bigger EOs in Northern Ireland, and they basically so far have paid £1 million in bonuses out to their staff. And the way I look at it, we look at it is that's £1 million going into the local community. Okay, would not, if it had been sold to a third party, that just wouldn't be happening. And I think that is a real key driver as well to actually that community support and the era that we live in. Actually, we need to look after ourselves as well. We need to look after the communities that we live in, and EO is a real good mechanism for doing that.
Yeah, it feels like you paid out the deferred consideration relatively quickly. I would say, anecdotally, in speaking to a number of firms, I think a lot of firms have found it's more difficult to pay out than perhaps they thought, and a number of firms are slightly behind the schedule that was previously agreed. Was there a time when you were paying out the deferred consideration, when you started to have, or maybe this is more a question for someone like David, that at some point the DC was going to be all fully repaid, and people talk about debt-free day and what's going to happen with the profits once the DC is paid off. Were there conversations like that took place at the board level with you, or is that something that's, I guess, they're currently looking at now? And any insights for firms that are approaching debt-free day? Because to my mind, there's not a lot of information out there about how you best allocate profits in an EO business once you've got to that point. Any sort of insights there, either from your own experience of Relinea or also just speaking in the sort of EO community generally?
Yeah, I think, look, it is a really important conversation to have, because actually, if we in Relinea, look, the deal was structured to be fair, okay, and I think the evidence is showing that it was a fair deal, but also the company has done extremely well. We were in some good and we managed to tap into, we had a really good base foundation. That some of the markets that we had been tapping into really started to grow quite substantially for us. So, there's all that came. So that's all led us to transitioning, to paying the consideration 2 years earlier than planned. And I see that all as positive. Okay. But what happens then after that consideration paid? What happens to that money? And this is where we kind of get into the whole kind of conversation about having those conversations beforehand and what it means when actually that's paid. And that's one of those things that, I wasn't on the page with, and I think they should be happening. And again, it's something I'm advocating for in terms of employee ownership. Ireland is one of the things that, again, it's that community and talking and sharing experiences. We have EMIs in place, okay, and within the organisation. And again, there is a counter argument for, well, how can you really fully advocate for an employee-owned business, but still some people have shares in that business? It's like literally the animal farm. Some of us are more, some oils are all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. But there is a real good justification for putting EMIs, you know what I mean? And it's to getting the best talent and keeping the talent to drive that business forward into the future. So I can understand the remit behind it, but also you've got to look at, in terms of your governance structures, how those EMIs fit within those structures themselves, and are the structures robust enough to ensure that individual compensation does not go above the employees, okay, and where they stand as well, okay. So it has to be about what's best for the company, what's best for the individual, and what's best for the employees overall, okay. But the employees need to override the individual requirements, and I think, and that's where your governance structures are really important to ensure that is maintained, okay. That as a trust board, your priority is to the employees, okay? It's not to the EMI holders, it's not to the directors, it's to the employees, and it's ensuring that your governance structures are robust enough to make that happen.
How did you change your governance? I mean, have you got the sort of classic main board that I guess David runs, the trust board, and then do you have a council or a partner voice group as well? What's the sort of basic governance structure within Relinea?
Yeah, so we have the directors, the board of directors, and then we have the trust board that sits above that. So we have, we obviously have the independent trustee, and we have an employee representative who was voted in, and then also then you have the other thing is you have David then as the director, and then I was then as the founder director, and obviously then with the transition then that was moved, but in terms of the council, it is something that we are considering, because obviously the board needs to be the trust board. I think there is, now that we've hit financial freedom, there has to be consideration about what the trust board looks like and what the operations board looks like. So, and that's conversations that are happening.
Right. What's the level of sort of financial transparency in the business, and did that materially change from pre-EO, where maybe you didn't share very much information, and then once you became employee owned in March 2022, has that significantly changed? I mean, did the team sort of get full picture of the P&L, cash balances and things? How detailed have you been in an explanation of the finances?
They don't, we're not, they're not provided with the full P&L. Okay.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything to them essentially, unless you can understand how to read a P&L. And this was one of my issues actually with the employee trustee, was, these people are extremely important because they're the employee voice on the trust board. And the person that we made our employee trustee, again, we were all learning. I'd never set up a board of any description, and here I was trying to set up a board of like a trustee board and a director's board, and I knew how to read a P&L, so did the other people there, but the employee trustee had never seen like a P&L in his life, and we were expecting him to look at this P&L, sign it off, and everything would be okay. And it took me a while to actually clock on, this guy needs training, this guy needs to be developed. You can't just land somebody in this position and just go, there you go, this is what you've got to do. It's not fair for a start. and it's just putting a lot of responsibility onto an individual who's not been given the tools to be able to handle that responsibility. So I think very quickly I kind of realized that we need training. We need this kind of focus on terms of what employee ownership looks like for this organization, and how we can get people up to speed in relation to that, and actually be able to hold each other to account. And I think it's not holding each other to account on the shop floor, but it's holding management to account as well. And I think, look, we were advised not to do anything for the first year, Barry, and I look back and I think that was a bit of a mistake. I think you move a business to EO. There was a significant change, and I think you need to be starting from day one about what this means. Okay, and people talk about it's already been a bit of a change or whatever. Don't rock the boat too much, but actually it's all part of the same thing. It is.
Yeah.
And you have to, it's about educating them right from the beginning about what their roles and responsibilities are within the organization, what voice they have within the organization. And for me, that's when you really start to truly embed EO.
What was the rationale for delaying all of that? I've not heard that sort of advice, because, interestingly, I think we almost started the process before the day when we became employee owned in 2019. And similarly, when Philippa came in as the new CEO, when she took over from me in 2025, for me, I said, it feels like if you come in and make no change, people go, oh, it's really not very different to how Barry ran the business. And I think you've got a sort of almost a one-off opportunity to ring some changes in. You're a new person making slightly different decisions. So yeah, I guess I was sort of slightly surprised that would be advice that would be given. It certainly wasn't advice we were given, and I'm glad it wasn't. Do you know what the rationale for that was?
I think the rationale was that there's a lot of changes happening, and just let the dust settle, and and then start to bring them in. But look, I think, there you go. It's just the classic. It's like, it depends on who you talk to. This was my personal experience. And I think, also the speed that we did get to financial freedom as well is a big indicator, because you want that voice to be there. You want the understanding to be there about what it means for them, for the employee owners. And without them getting that input, it's just another organization like any other organization, ultimately.
Yeah. I think often when we talk about, I think we've had these conversations before with employee ownership, there are so many overwhelmingly positive reasons for employee ownership for all, for the employee owners, for the vendors, right across the business, for clients. Sometimes we're so keen on promoting all the huge positives. I think more recently we've recognised there are some challenges as well of running an employee-owned business, and certainly for Philippa, who took over from me, grappling with paying out the DC, trying to grow a business at the same time is difficult. Are there things that you've encountered on your journey over the last 4 years where you think, actually, we could have done that better, or things that others may experience as they go down the route of employee, sort of war stories that we can share with one another to say, actually, this is really important that you get this right? Anything that particularly springs to mind?
Yeah, like, I suppose speaking from a founder's perspective, it's ensuring that you have conversations with people, okay, and understand what their thoughts on what it means for them, what employee ownership means for them. Because I think we were also so involved in the process, we didn't actually consider what it would look like afterwards. Okay. Right. And I think that's what is it going to look like for, especially those in the senior, what it means to them and what it looks like for them at the other side is a really, really important conversation to have, because then you start to understand actually what's driving, what's driving me is different from what's driving Paul, David. So it's sure. It's different for everybody. And I think it's really important to understand what that means. And I think then it gives you a much clearer path. And I think it would be probably a much smoother path as well. Yeah. In regards to how the company moves forward. Because the priority here for all of us is that the sustainability of the business and the growth of the business. But that's where, it's just different factors. For me then, following that is actually, my legacy. And ensuring that the company remains EO. And I think this is a conversation that is actually starting to come up more often, is what happens if this company, comes up and potentially for a resale. And my understanding nowadays is that private equity are looking at employee-owned companies more and more, because they're seeing them how successful they are, and they're seeing them as a target as such. And I don't want that to happen. And it's making sure that, how do we, how the mechanisms that we're setting up in terms of creating an EOT, are they robust enough that if you don't want that to happen, can you prevent that from happening? Okay. Sure. Within the remits of the governance structure and whatnot. And I feel that this is an area of a potential, really, this is a big area of threat to the trust model. That as these businesses, it's more and more businesses go EO, and it becomes a much more popular model, that actually it's going to attract the attention of organisations that, it's then about the money, and then it defeats the whole purpose of why we're doing this.
I completely agree in terms of what you can try and enshrine in the legal and governance documents. You can do as much as you possibly can. Were there any other things that you talked about, legacy, that you sort of want to make sure are continued in Relinea beyond your tenure, in terms of things like your core values? Or I was speaking to someone the other day who did a sort of almost a letter of wishes when they stepped down to say, was there anything like that you said, this is how I would like the business to continue, that sits over and above or sits alongside the sort of legal and governance documents?
Yeah, so you can I did as well. Like, it's like about what your vision and values were for the business. You're like, why you wanted the business to basically be going forward. But it's a letter of wishes. So you kind of putting down as the founder how you would like the business to be. How you would want to see it in 5-10 years time. But actually, ultimately, it's, I want to see it survival. I want to see but I want to see it surviving as an EO business. That's what that's what I want.
Yeah. And is your sense that the new leadership team who have taken over equally are they as passionate about employee ownership as you are?
I suppose that's a question for them.
Your sense.
My sense, look, it's, they're leaders. They're there to drive the business forward. I think their priority is that, is revenue generation and growth of the business. And again, that's for their benefit and the employees from that perspective. Long term, I would like, because they have, they work in the business. They've also, there's also other people that they respect or work in the business as well. So they want to see that progressing too in terms of the long term. But to be honest, Barry, it's that's a question for them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think EMI is an interesting one in an EO business, but at the end of the day, certainly some of the conversations I've had, if you build in hurdles into the EMI that suggest that you are overall significantly increasing the value of the business, and you have, as we do in our business, a profit share structure, which is based on the percentage of profits, yes, the CEO may be the beneficiary of EMI. And I guess there's a question mark there around how do they redeem those shares, and it may be that the EOT is happy to buy back the shares. But actually, without hurdles, I can see the employee beneficiaries being more challenged by that. But if there are that are linked to them profits or the early repayment of the deferred consideration, the value of the business goes up, hopefully significantly. They benefit from that in a way that they would if they'd gone to a non-EO business. But then ultimately the profits all flow down to the employee owners and the distribution goes up. So, I can see both sides of it. And I think it's a tricky one if you're trying to build a genuinely progressive growth business and you're trying to bring in a top team where there are incentives if they go elsewhere that are not inherent in an EO business by virtue of the structure. I think EMI does have its place, but it's got to be sort of well thought through and structured well.
Yes, and I think that goes back to speaking to people, okay, and that peer support and getting, those conversations. I wasn't privy to those conversations, okay, and for me, the structure around EMI was quite basic. There's definitely could have been things that I could have put into the whole overall scheme that actually I feel that there's not enough protections for the employees at the moment. And that's my belief. Other people will disagree with that.
Right. Yeah. It's a really interesting area. And I think the other thing that we've sort of come across is that EMI and EOT are both quite complex areas in themselves, and you absolutely need to have a law firm that if you're going and putting in an EMI scheme, you need to have a law firm that really understands EOT businesses. And again, we've come across situations where that hasn't been the case, and it's led to all sorts of problems just because of the nuances of alphabet shares and various things, and I guess the unintended consequences of putting in an EMI scheme with different classes of shares and things is very complicated. So again, I think if you're going to do it, you just need to go to a firm that really understands EOTs.
But going back to our situation here in Northern Ireland, we do not, our ecosystem here on EOTs is never probably going to be enough to justify having a standalone EO company like a law firm.
Sure.
Okay, it's just it's not going to be big enough in the short term anyway. And this is where some of the work that I'm doing, like a lot of the work we're doing with Employee Ownership Ireland. So just for information, this is a member-led organisation that we launched last year. And it's about promoting employee ownership as a succession model, because obviously before it was like it not existed here beforehand. And part of that is we is to support the advisor community, okay, and it's educating them on what employee ownership, so they're aware of what employee ownership is. So if they're an owner or their client comes to them and said, what is this, they're not going, you don't want to look at that, it's not good, because they don't understand it. So we want them to be educated on what it means and what the process is. But also we believe it's our responsibility to advocate for what is good practice, okay, and what good practice looks like, because you only know what you know. And then it's up to the organizations or the industry itself. Then, as we can only advocate for them and educate the market, and then it's up to the market then to make the decisions on how they move forward. And I think we are hitting that point where there's some transactions happening, and this is where we feel that we can really start to bring value in terms of, like, we're never going to have EO specialists per se that are concentrating on that purely. So that's where I think EOI steps into that space, and we've got an education program starting, and we're going in and speaking to advisors, doing lunch and learn type sessions, talking to them about actually what the process is, what it looks like, what it's going to mean to your to your clients, why it's so important that your clients are aware of this, but also actually some of the challenges I faced, what processes you need to look at and consider going forward. You know, if you do go through an EO type deal, and what it means for not only your client but for the employees, and making sure that you grasp what the owner wants or what the founder wants, you know, for the vision and their letter of wishes going forward as well.
Yeah. And do you feel you're sort of pushing an open door there when you do arrange these seminars and events? And I guess second question is, it is interesting when you were talking earlier about the fact that it was an M&A broker that actually first mentioned employee ownership. I reached out to an M&A broker fairly recently and said, you're probably aware, but we became employee owned. We should come and chat about it. And he said, oh, we don't believe in employee ownership at all. There's no point in having that conversation. And, you know why with M&A companies that might be the case in terms of their business model. But in terms of what you're doing in Northern Ireland, is the landscape generally sort of welcoming those conversations? And is there a sense of sort of growing momentum? Or again, are you the sort of best kept secret? A bit like you would be.
It's like when I hear that, it's like I get like it frustrates me because it shouldn't be the best kept secret. That you don't want to be the best kept secret. You want to be, you want to be the best advocated, like model that can be out there. Why aren't we all doing it? That's what I want. And I think we are facing a real, like I mentioned here, Northern Ireland is a country full of SMEs, and a lot of those are now hitting second, going into their third generation, and we all know the statistics. Statistics aren't great for third generation businesses. So there's a real concern there, but obviously with the inheritance tax rules just changing as well, that brings in something else. So what's happening is that the conversation, I think much more companies and, founders are starting to have that conversation. Actually, what's going to happen here with this business? What we do find, and I suppose what we find in our journey, is the tax incentive is the hook to get people in through the door, which is obviously why when they reduced the tax down by 50%, there was a real concern. Yeah. But what we have found, and what we were finding generally in conversations, was it gets us in the door. It gets us to have that initial conversation with a founder, obviously that's we want to get in front of, because ultimately they are going to people that are going to make the deal. And what we find quite quickly is after that initial conversation, you start talking about legacy, you start talking about the employees, and obviously a lot of the people who are the founders live in the communities that these businesses are in, and so they want to be able to walk down the street and look their fellow community in the eye. And so the conversation very quickly moves to actually, something, what would happen to this business if I sold it to a third party and they closed it within a couple of years? And that's what we see the transition happening. And I think the drop in the tax benefit, the capital gains tax to 50%. Yeah, there was an initial impact, it's like because of but I think it's still a good arrangement. Okay, in terms of the tax, it's still really good in comparison to what is out there. But also it moves it on from another. It's just not about the money is extremely important. It's like you deserve your reward for what you've created, no doubt about it. But actually, it's what happens afterwards is the key. Yeah, definitely. Is there anything, as we sort of come towards the end of the podcast, anything that we haven't covered on Relinea around employee ownership or EOI that you think we should have covered by way of key conversations? I think, look, it's just really reinforcing the fact that employee ownership just isn't a magic word. Okay, it's just it just doesn't happen by things do not change. You do not get the benefits of employee ownership by accident or by just saying you're employee owned. Ultimately, from my perspective, it's a governance model. Okay, and governance models only work when the roles and responsibilities and the expectations are clear. Sure. For all the individuals there. And for me, that's something that I've become much more conscious of, and I think that it's for anybody that involved in this process to be much more aware of, definitely going forward. Brilliant.
So we have just a few quick fire questions to ask you towards the end of the podcast. So the first one is, finish the sentence. Employee ownership is?
Employee ownership is, well, for me, it is about creating a system where everybody has a voice. It means that everybody has a voice, and you have a right to have your voice heard. That's what employee ownership means for me.
Brilliant. My biggest EO surprise was?
Well, how lonely my journey was.
Right.
But also how exciting it has been. And I think, you'll know this, Barry, this is a wonderful space to be in. Okay. But I think we're starting to get much more honest conversations than we were getting a few years ago. And that's a good thing. People need to know what the pluses and minuses are.
Sure.
So I think that's really, I think, what's coming forward. And it's just, I suppose, like, knowing that you don't have to be in. There is like organizations like EOI that means you don't have to be on your own anymore.
Yeah, brilliant. I don't know if you're a book reader, Karen, but
I've seen this one. I was going, I'm more of a I do listen to podcasts and stuff like that, and I do read books, but I try and get some downtime on the books. I read What Is Your Why there recently, and that's really good.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. And then to finish off, we have a confessional. Okay, so you have a choice here of three things. So a moment of honesty. So that could be a time when you made a significant mistake, decision you regret. That's a moment of honesty. An unfiltered story, time when you had to fire someone or something like that, or a secret struggle, imposter syndrome, balancing family and work. Any of those catch your attention?
Okay, this is a wee bit off the EO kind of tangent, really, because I am a real advocate for women in business, okay? And women stepping up and just doing it. Don't, like, the stars are never going to align fully, and it's just go and do it. And I think that whole imposter syndrome is like, I still think on days that what happened with Relinea was more by accident than by design. Okay. And I've slowly got to realize that actually, no, it wasn't by accident. It definitely wasn't. But I think it's taking, it's looking at what, from an EO, it's looking at what you've created and whatever you do. Okay. And what you're capable of doing and just, basically making sure that you try and get as much precaution, take as much precautions, find out as much as you can, talk to as many people as you can. But, if it feels right for you, then just move forward, whether it be with an EO or with starting a business or whatever. Okay. It's just do your homework. But it's never going to be perfect, and surround yourself with people that can support you in whatever you're doing is the big thing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting how frequently imposter syndrome comes up, and thankfully I've been in a position over the last few months to meet with a number of quite guests that have really set up and run very significant EO businesses. And there's always that sense of, I'm not quite sure how I've managed to get to where I am, having established a business of 300 or 400 people, and yet still think it's sort of, they weren't responsible for that success. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Relinea, your challenges of stepping down, some of the challenges of employee ownership and that whole area around EMI and incentivizing everybody across the business. I think it's been really insightful, some really great takeaways. And I'm sure lots of people who are running EO businesses or contemplating them will find your advice and your story incredibly helpful. So really appreciate your time today, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Barry. It's been a privilege.